about to hear a revolution in talk radio, Liberty Talk Radio, where the critical thinking will defrag your mind of propaganda-ridden viruses induced by mass media news programming. No BS here, just the facts.
And now we present to you America's quintessential iconoclastic anomaly. Wow. In talk radio, your host, Joe Cristiano.
Welcome, everyone, to Liberty Talk Radio, America's libertarian voice. I'm your host, Joe Cristiano, and this is your antidote to popular talk radio. During our live broadcast, we invite you to call 646-652-4620 or toll-free 888-773-4496. This morning, we are pleased to have with us our guest, Kyrel Zantonavitch, a longtime objectivist, libertarian, and classical liberal. And this is a term that very few people understand, and we're going to get clarification on that. Let me see that again. All right. He is the author of the book Pure Libertarian Fire and director of the think tank in New York, the Liberal Institute. So it's my pleasure now to introduce Kyrel Zantonavitch. Kyrel, are you there? Let's see. Where are you? He'll be here in a second. There he is. Okay. Kyrel, there you are. Now I can see you. Thank you so much for agreeing to be our guest this morning on Liberty Talk Radio.
My pleasure.
Kyrel, if I had to categorize the subject matter that we're about to embark in, I would say it's sort of esoteric in a way. You are a classical liberal. I have an appreciation for that. I'll bet 99.9%, and I'm being conservative, of people have no concept of what a classical liberal is. When they hear liberal, they think progressive. When they think libertarian, they think of, as I used to say when I was on KFAQ, a libertarian to most people are these libertarian guys, these guys who like to dance in the street in their dirty underwear. They have no idea what these terms mean. And in fact, in most cases, people who consider themselves either conservatives or progressives have no idea what they mean either. So looks like we're going to have a situation where we're going to have to clarify these before we get into any heavy discussion. Would you agree with me on that?
Oh, yes, absolutely, especially since in so many ways America is a kind of bipolar society and Western civilization is too. So we have a two-party system. And basically, politically, everyone thinks that the entire thing is covered by pre-modern religion-based right-wing conservatism and post-modern collectivism-based left-wing progressivism. But I make the case that there's actually a third alternative, which is classical liberalism, or at least updated classical liberalism. And I even extend the case maybe 2 steps further, and I say that philosophically, liberalism is an ideology which contrasts with the right and the left. And I even say that liberalism as an ideology, as a belief in reason and individualism and freedom, it actually began 2,600 years ago with the Greeks.
Yeah, well, if I mention to anyone, and even one of my friends, that I'm a classical liberal, they would automatically think I voted for Obama.
Well, that's sad, but that's also an important issue, and I'm glad you brought it up, because in many respects, I think the fight for the battle of words is the fight for the fate of the world. Right. I think that if you get the vocabulary right, then that's like half the battle. So I think that people need to sort of understand, if they can, that historically, maybe like 150 years ago, there was such a thing as 3 political viewpoints. There was maybe the right-wing conservatives, the left-wing progressives, which were sort of like known as radicals or socialists, but there was also a liberal group. I mean, Friedrich Hayek noted that liberalism as a political philosophy was actually the dominant philosophy of America as late as the 1870s. And then by the year 1914, it faded away into nothing. And basically, the only people that were liberals were like cranks and eccentrics and old guys. And to a certain extent, there are people like the right wing and the left wing which were fighting over the term liberal. So the conservatives would say, well, we're the true liberals, and the progressives would say, no, we're the liberals, because it was a great word. But again, my book although it's heavily concerned with politics, it's mostly focused on philosophy. So I would make the case that liberalism is a philosophy which began with, for example, the ancient Greeks, especially people like Aristotle and Epicurus and Zeno the Stoic. And this great philosophy is actually the same philosophy which has continued for 2,600 years. The very best thinkers have had the same philosophy. And this is something that I've identified. Now they've improved it over time, but basically they all believe the same thing. The Greeks, the Romans, the Renaissance thinkers, the Enlightenment thinkers, and also the three groups you and I are aware of, these radical avant-garde groups known as the Austrian economic thinkers, the libertarian political thinkers, and the objectivist philosophical thinkers.
Yeah. How do you distinguish classical liberalism from libertarianism?
Well, they're basically the same, except that libertarianism is very focused on politics, and classical liberalism is more or less understood to be a full-service philosophy, such as, the Enlightenment liberals of the 1700s. Like the great classical liberal thinkers would be John Locke, Adam Smith, Voltaire, Thomas Jefferson, and people like that. Now,
you claim to be the world's only pure classical liberal thinker.
That's correct.
Right, would you defend that position for us, please? I agree with you, but I just want you to defend your position for the sake of our audience.
Well, I'll try. I mean, it's a very arrogant claim, and I don't expect people to agree with me the first time I hear it. But I'm the only one that really seems to understand in a clear way that all of these thinkers, the four historical groups I just named and the three current cutting-edge groups, all seem to believe the same thing. So I believe in what I would say is a kind of a definitive amount of epistemology of reason, ethics of individualism, and politics of freedom, which is my definition of liberalism. So I can sort of define it a little bit more roundly by saying that pure liberalism means your basic epistemology or your basic approach to truth is based upon reason, rationality, logic, and science, and it's based on that 100%. And your approach to individualism is based on individualism's. Your approach to ethics is based on individualism, self-interest, and personal happiness. Your approach to politics is based on liberty, justice, and individual rights. And I think that all of these are definitive concepts. I'm the only one that's been able to identify them as being definitive concepts. And I would compare them to, let's say, the terms life or health or pleasure or happiness. And once you've achieved life as opposed to death, that's everything. Once you've achieved health as opposed to sickness or injury, that's everything. Once you've achieved pleasure as opposed to pain, that's everything. So that's perfection. So my book it has arrogance, it has a kind of pomposity even in the title, because I refer to pure liberalism as the new, general, and perfected version of Western liberalism. So I think that reason, individualism, and freedom are definitive concepts. And you have to argue about the details, but the basic idea, I think they are final concepts. I think it's like it's the end of history philosophically.
Well, have you ever been accused of being like an anarchist? And of course, the thought process when people say anarchy, they think of burning cars turned over in the middle of the street, total chaos, people killing each other willy-nilly. And total misery and deprivation. I mean, that's the concept of anarchism. But have you been accused of that? And if you have, how do you counter it? And then how do you distinguish between the two?
Well, I have been accused of it by nothing less than the anarchists themselves. But I'm not an anarchist.
I know.
They think I am. But I think that in politics, it's all about the non-initiation of force. You can do anything you want in your life. You just cannot attack the person or the property of your fellow man. And so what that means is that government has very few functions. It basically, as far as I can tell, it only has 5 functions. It has the police to stop the bad guys on the local level, the military to stop the bad guys on the international level. It has a court system, a prison system, and then the government bureaucracy itself. So that comes close to being anarchy, but it's still basically a powerful government which really does stop people from being criminals or violating life, liberty, property, and privacy. It really does stop people from initiating force against their fellow man. So that's not anarchy.
Yeah. Well, there's groups now that consider themselves anarcho-libertarians, so to speak, and I think,
right.
And that's just an emphasis of saying, listen, we don't need government. We can self-govern and still be libertarians, and they throw that the anarcho part of it to stress its a distance from any sort of centralized government, but a government in which is truly elected by the people, is one of the people, to benefit all the people, to make sure that no one's rights or properties are confiscated for the good of someone else.
I think that these anarchist guys are genuine libertarians like you and I, and they do believe in freedom, but they simply don't understand that without a government, which was invented 5,300 years ago in Mesopotamia, and it was a good idea. It's just it hasn't been perfected so far. But they don't realize they don't have any way to protect their individual rights. So their so-called private defense forces or security forces, that's either not going to work, or it's going to be a sort of a de facto government, or it's going to be a kind of a mafia. I think that if the anarchists ever did have a choice of living in true anarchy, they would, for even a few hours, they would come running as fast as they could to the nearest libertarian state they could find.
Yeah, right. I agree. Tell us about your book. How does your book approach this subject that is so difficult for the average American to even to conceptualize? I mean, I have, I've been in this business for some time. I've been talking about this for some time, and I get accused of absolutely everything in the books, and everything is misinterpreted. Like I said, libertarian, they think I'm some sort of transvestite, liking, wanting to dance in the street naked or so. I mean, the concepts are unbelievable what they think of when I say that. And I never tell people I'm a libertarian because it conjures up all sorts of misconceptions. How does your book attempt to clarify that, and what approach did you take to draw people in, to make them start, and I hate to use the word, have Americans start thinking? I know that's a tough act to follow, but I mean, I don't know how you do that, but how did you approach that?
Well, I approached it, I think, from a very simple perspective. Like, I really do make the claim, however arrogant, that I'm the first pure liberal around. So when I approach these issues from politics or ethics or epistemology, I sort of begin at the very beginning. Although I would at least correct you in one regard, and that is this book is not really for the mass man. I consider it to be for the intellectual and moral elite. So I'm trying as hard as I can to tell the truth from a simplified philosophical perspective. And then I use this pure liberal perspective to analyze the current issues and the historical issues in politics and philosophy.
Yeah, well, because when I read the briefs of your book. I didn't read the book itself, but I read parts of it, online. I thought to myself, I said, I don't think this would ever penetrate the skull of the average American. I mean, they would be all over the place. They would take a particular word and then run with it in the wrong direction. And I said, boy, it would be great if everyone read this book and understood it. It would be fabulous. It would change the whole complexion of our political arena, which needs to be changed radically. And I think this book can do it. But if you can only get the people to read something like this. Now, you talk about metaphysics, which is the study of objective experience, and epistemology, which is the study or the theory of nature and the grounds of knowledge, especially with reference to limits and validity. How do you bring these in a comprehensive manner so that people can digest it and then translate it to something that's practical?
Well, I'm actually kind of proud of that. In general terms, the vast majority of my life, I have not liked the subject of epistemology. I don't even like the word. And certainly when someone says the word metaphysics, I assume that 9 times out of 10, they're going to be talking about some sort of nonsense.
That's correct. That's the first thing that comes to mind, right?
maybe some sort of insidious, pernicious nonsense, which is very destructive.
Right.
So my book has 6 essays, very short essays on epistemology, in which I was sort of gritting my teeth when I wrote them. But it's very simple. It's like simple reason and common sense. And my approach, I'm sort of proud. I'm very proud of those essays. I think they contrast with Aristotle and Ayn Rand. They supplement and complement them very nicely. But I would say at least one thing, which I can perhaps say on a radio interview, which will not leave your audience too bored. And that is, I think in many respects, if you get the epistemology right, you've basically solved every problem in the whole world. So the beginning of knowledge is something rather like this. X is equal to X, which is the law of equality. X is X, which is the law of identity. And then there's the famous syllogism, which was taught by Aristotle. If A is equal to B and B is equal to C, then A is equal to C. But I would also say, if you can just understand in your mind clearly that 1 + 1 = 2, an elephant is bigger than a mouse, fire is hotter than ice, gravity really does cause things to fall at 32 feet per second. If you can understand these simple things, then before too long you can understand things which are much more complex, such as perhaps that the Beatles play better music than a 3-year-old which is banging on a pot. And you can also understand that human happiness is better secured under libertarianism than under some form of welfare statism.
Well, I guess the last one is the one that I think baffles me, why people do not comprehend that. They keep on looking at a failed state, and I emphasize failed state constantly. No one in their right minds would continue to do the same thing that didn't work. And everyone knows that, even people who are incredibly uneducated know that when something doesn't work, it doesn't work. They don't keep on going back and do the same thing again unless they're clinically insane or retarded or whatever the case may be. But yet when it comes to government has failed in absolutely every endeavor it has pursued. Everyone. They have not one success on the books. Not one. No one can. Now, of course, the government claims that everything they do is a success. Not one. And yet, you have a large contingency in the United States going back, looking to government to solve the problems when they have never passed the test once. Help me out with that.
Well, I wish I could, but in some sense, I'm simply baffled by my fellow man as well. I sometimes consider myself to be a normal person, which is somehow bizarrely stuck on the planet of the apes. I can't understand why freedom has not triumphed. I mean, but of course, right now we're still in a system of very much a binary system, a two-party system, and people are just not aware that there is a third alternative. They think that libertarianism is something crazy. But my book, hopefully I'm very simple in everything. My book consists of 99 mini essays. They're very short. They're very radical and emphatic, but I try and start with epistemology, you might say. I build up to ethics, which means self-interest, personal happiness, and it is not your job to live for the sake of God or to live for the sake of the collective. And I try and lead to politics, and then again I discuss the book is like 1/4 politics. So I love politics. I'm a political junkie. But hopefully I explain things in a clear, clean, emphatic way. But I also explain them in a way which is based upon this very simple, almost childish philosophy, which is called pure liberalism. So my book does not advocate like the detailed like the 7 principal virtues of Ayn Rand's philosophy of objectivism. I just say you should seek your own happiness. But people need to study. They need to study it on their own and work out the details. The main claim of my book is that there really is this thing which could be called liberalism, and I view all of human history through this one prism. So between liberalism and illiberalism. Like, let me give you a quick example without pontificating too much. When I was growing up, believe it or not, I was taught overall the correct thing. I was taught that there was a vast contrast between Aristotle and Plato, and this was like a great seminal issue of all time in Western civilization. And I was taught that Aristotle was the better of the two, and that's correct. And then I was taught that there was a great battle between John Locke and Thomas Hobbes, and John Locke was the best, and I agree with that. Then I was taught there was a great battle between Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton, and Jefferson was the best, so I agree with that. And then I was also taught that there was a great battle between Voltaire and I forget the other guys, which I don't like. But anyway, the point is the difference between all of these guys is that one is a liberal and one is an illiberal. They all have a kind of a parallelism. I can't believe I forgot Rousseau. But these are like four great ideological contrasts. And so the merit of my book, or the virtue of my book, is that I was able to identify just how really, really similar all these good guy thinkers were, and just how really, really similar all these bad guy thinkers were. And I give them a special name, which is I call them liberals and illiberals, and I define them in a kind of a brutally simple way, which is I say the liberals are advocates of epistemology of reason, ethics of individualism, and politics of freedom. And you go all up and down the last 2,600 years of history, ever since the Greeks invented science and philosophy, and you can find liberals and illiberals. And so I'm a great champion of the liberals.
Well, in the next couple of months, we hope to have the capacity of having interview three people, and then I would be the fourth, the moderator, at one time, and we split the screen 4 ways rather than 2. The studio's brand new, and every week we're doing something, so we're taking one step at a time. I would love to have you back at a later date, if you would agree to it, and have a progressive on the air at the same time. That would be just an absolutely dynamic program, because I'm sure you have encountered numerous times a discussion with a modern day progressive. Could you tell us how those conversations develop and what the results of those conversations typically are?
Well, I may actually disappoint you in this, because I speak to everyone, including maybe like the worst people around, which are the Muslims. But I consider myself to be a radical and a world revolutionary, and maybe like the most radical thinker on the planet. And one way in which I emphatically disagree with the libertarians and the objectivists is the way they seem to spend so much time going after the left. I attack the right wing and the left wing equally. Okay. I think that Ayn Rand made a severe mistake in being continuously friends with the conservatives and the Republicans. And so I basically interact with the progressives on the left and the conservatives on the right in pretty much the same way. I'm always very sympathetic to them on the surface, but I try and point out their errors in a kind of a quiet, Socratic manner. But I'm a radical, and you might say I have a bigger fish to fry. So my enemies are basically the libertarian anarchists and the objectivist cultists. Okay. And also from a historical perspective, I have enemies which are no longer alive, but they're very alive to me. Like I think the great destroyers of reason and individualism and freedom, I think the great illiberals of all time are Bishop Berkeley, David Hume, Immanuel Kant, and Friedrich Hegel. These are guys that lived, more than 200 years ago, died more than 200 years ago, but they wrote torturous philosophy. My philosophy is very simplistic, direct. You can understand the words. So I try and I attack people that are perhaps different from what you suppose. I'm not a hardline enemy of the left.
Yeah. Well, I find it easier discussing this type of philosophy with a conservative, with the exception when it comes to war. Conservatives want to distance themselves from government, but yet they hand their daughters and their sons over to the government to go overseas and kill someone that they have no idea who it is and why they're doing it. And there seems to be this dichotomy that you just say, well, if you don't trust the government, why are you encouraging, and literally encouraging your son and your daughter to go and die for them? And they never have an answer to that. And then they defend the war because of Islam, and if we don't go there, they'll come here. And they repeat exactly what they hear on television. I find it incredibly frustrating.
Well, you might be frustrated with me because, like I said, I'm a very radical thinker, and so I identify the conservatives as being very weak in terms of supporting economic freedom, and then they're fundamentally opposed to social and personal freedom.
Right.
And the left wing is weak in terms of supporting social and personal freedom, and then they're very opposed to economic freedom. So they're both about the same to me, and right. I classify them as being illiberals.
I see.
One thing that may shock you is that just as I claimed that a kind of height was hit in humanity with the classical liberal era, then we went sort of downhill, and especially the world after between 1914 and 1985 was the dark age. We're a little bit out of that now, but I guess that's my point. I do claim that we're in a dark age, but one thing which is sort of interesting is I think that over the last 30 years, the world has gone in the direction of philosophical liberalism, and that's because of four very great thinkers, or at least influential ones. Number one, it's Ronald Reagan from America, who was not a right-winger or a left-winger. He was a liberal rebel. Margaret Thatcher, which was not a right-winger or a left-winger, he was a liberal. Mikhail Gorbachev from Russia, who was not a right-winger or a left-winger, he was a liberal, and Deng Xiaoping, who was not a right-winger or a left-winger, he was a liberal. And I say that the whole world in the last 30 years has been involved in a renaissance, and we've all been secretly going in the direction of liberalism. Now, it's a very poor version compared to what I have in my book, but I mean, Eastern Europe has changed, Russia has changed, India has changed, China has changed, maybe Africa and South America and Oceania are not making progress yet, but they will eventually. But they've all gone in the direction of liberalism. So what that means is, in so many ways, they embrace reason and individualism and freedom. Like just one thing off the top of my head is I remember reading an article about someone saying that the word selfishness in India has a completely different meaning now than it did 30 years ago. And certainly we know that selfishness in Japan has a completely different meaning now than it did 30 or 40 or 50 years ago. These people are not dedicated towards self-sacrifice, they're dedicated toward personal happiness. And freedom has risen all over the world. Communism is in decline. Crime is in decline. So I say, believe it or not, we're experiencing a kind of liberal renaissance right now, believe it or not.
Well, when people hear that people are working for their own betterment, they consider that to be very selfish and almost removed from society, unconcerned about society, when the exact opposite is true. And let me just take a second and give you an example. Recently, I was on a major radio program, which we may be returning to next week, and I left, and we didn't leave on bad. I didn't cancel my contract because of any hard feelings. I just felt like there's so much more that we can do, and big commercial radio stations are very stoic. They're set in their ways. This is the way we do things. And 100 years from now, I can guarantee you we're going to be doing the same thing, and they don't see what's happening around them. So when I left, I said, well, what am I going to do now? I own a couple of companies. I'm busy 24 hours a day. So what I do is I open up my own studio. Of course, what else would you do? Now, many people would consider that very, very selfish. But as a result, I bring with that many people around me, agents, media people, technicians, all that are involved in this radio program. I have two technicians here in the studio now. I'm renting space from a major office building here in Tulsa. And a tremendous amount of economic activity economic activity has in fact been generated as a result of me just saying, the heck with it, I'll open my own studio. Now, you could say that's very selfish, or you can say, well, that's very altruistic. I don't think it's selfish at all. I think it's something that everyone should aspire to, and everyone around you benefits. Am I on the right track, or are you and I on perpendicular tracks?
I think I halfway agree with you, but I think it's important to study, even though I'm promoting this thing known as simplified liberalism, and I contrast it with the philosophy of objectivism, which is fully worked out or massively worked out. I still think that people should study objectivism. And what if you were to study it, you would realize, or at least you would be acquainted with the argument that self-interest is a good thing, and I think that Ayn Rand presented her philosophy in a way which is difficult in all kinds of ways. On the one hand, she wrote in a sort of middle brow way, which is not quite for the elite, as I write, but it's not quite for the mass men either. It's very strange, actually. But the main problem is that she presented her views as a kind of religion, as a kind of a belief system instead of a thought system. So it turns people off. But just to get back to your question, I think that there's a kind of amazing brotherhood of man, which people don't realize, and it's based upon self-interest. If you pursue your self-interest, it goes much beyond what Adam Smith said in terms of the invisible hand. If you're a truly selfish person, then what that means is that you love yourself, you love your own happiness, your own pleasure. And you seek to create meaning and purpose in your life. You set very high standards for yourself. You set very high ideals. You try and live up to them. And of course, what you want in your life is a huge amount of girlfriends and friends which you can talk to intellectually. And so selfishness, it creates basically people that are demigods. It's not people that self-sacrifice for each other and sort of secretly hate each other, and you see the man walking down the street and you think that you're his brother's keeper and you have to sacrifice to him and he has to sacrifice to you. So of course the two of you secretly hate each other. So that whole Christian notion and also the socialist notion, the right wing and the left wing notion, is wrong as usual and as always. They're unified in condemning selfishness, but they're wrong. So the world needs to sort of study Ayn Rand's approach to individualism and the Enlightenment liberals said that man lives for his own sake. He's an end in himself. It's brutally wrong to try and self-sacrifice yourself to God, which probably doesn't exist, or to self-sacrifice yourself to the collective, which probably doesn't exist. I mean, even if you could self-sacrifice, how would you benefit God, and how would you really benefit the collective? The only thing you can really benefit is yourself. Even if you self-sacrifice for your friends and your family, which is the better alternative by far, it's still wrong. You'd rather walk with equals as two noble creatures, not as two people that are like self-sacrificial victims and mutual slaves and mutual masters.
Right. Okay. We're going to leave you on that note just for a minute for our station identification.
Okay.
Please just don't go away. We'll just go blank on the screen just for a little while, about a minute or so. Okay. We shall be right back.
Okay.
You're listening to Liberty Talk Radio. Political talk derived from a historical perspective. Not always palatable, but good food for thought. Pure libertarian talk with host Joe Cristiano. LibertyTalkRadio.com.
Express Test is your go-to company for on-site occupational health testing services. That's right, we said on-site. That means we will meet you at your facility for a free health and occupational safety consultation. Express Test specializes in hearing conservation, respiratory protection, and employee safety. We can help you establish viable programs tailored to your business and employee needs. For your free consultation, call 918-743-2929 or visit us at expresstest.com. That's 918-743-2929 or expresstest.com. Do you find yourself asking, what did you say? Aaron Cristiano of Ranch Acres Audiology has over 25 years of experience helping patients just like you.
Hearing requires conservation. We need to be aware and we need to be responsible for our own hearing health.
Understand more with a little help from Ranch Acres Audiology. Call 918-749-7711. That's 918-749-7711 to learn more. We'd like to thank attorney Constance Squires for her support of Liberty Talk Radio. If you want a comprehensive way to affordably avoid legal issues, call Constance Squires. For a free consultation, call 918-254-9283 or go online at isthyWillDone.com.
This isn't your typical talk radio show. This is Liberty Talk Radio.
Folks, we're back. This is Joe Cristiano. You're listening to Liberty Talk Radio. With us, we have Kyrel Zantonavitch. He's the author of the book, Pure Libertarian Fire, and the director of the Liberal Institute in New York. And we're pleased to have him here. And we're having a deep conversation. I really hope people are listening very, very carefully. But we do want you to call. Don't be afraid. Most people are afraid to call in. And in radio, only 1/10 of 1% of the people who listen call in, and if you get 0.1%, you're lucky. But when we have very interesting guests, and when we do so, people tend to say, because I ask them all the time, I say, how come you haven't called? They say, oh, I found this so interesting, I didn't want to interrupt, We don't want you to do that. This program is for you. It's not for us. It's for you. So please call in. Our direct number is 646-652-4620 or toll free 888-773-4496. You're not interrupting us. You're being part of the program. We want you to be that way. Kyrel, you talk about defining evil as making yourself unhappy. Could you sort of help me out with that a little bit?
Yes, certainly. Although I have to correct you a little bit and say that the name of the book is Pure Liberal Fire.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So,
what did I say?
You said Pure Libertarian Fire, which comes close.
Apologies.
But it narrows the focus. So
I'm sorry.
All right. So I would say that ethics consists of basically two subjects, which is personal morality and social morality. And the most important thing is personal morality, which people don't know. But social morality counts too. So your main job in life is to make yourself happy. And in large respects, if you want to help out your fellow man, you should leave him alone. But going beyond that, so you focus on making yourself happy and not hurting others. But this is such a contrast to the right-wing conservatives and Christians and monotheists and the left-wing progressives and socialists, because they say that you should sacrifice yourself to your fellow man. But if you live for your own sake, what happens is that you sort of teach your fellow man how to be happy, and you teach by example, and that's the best way to teach. And one sort of, just to take this very quickly, one sort of familiar virtue which we all know is called honesty. But honesty can be divided up into two categories, personal honesty and social honesty. And believe it or not, the most important thing is personal honesty by far. So people think it's easy to walk around looking at yourself in the mirror and facing the truth. But no, it's amazingly hard. It's terrifyingly hard. So believe it or not, you can actually be a very honest person if you tell quite a few lies to your fellow man, as long as you're honest to yourself. Of course, in general, you should be honest to yourself and to your fellow man.
Yeah. So I look in the mirror, I say, man, I'm the best looking guy in the world.
Right.
I have a problem, right? Okay. Now, let me give you my stance on religion. And when I say this, I'm sure many people are going to hang up and write me off forever. Living in Oklahoma, it is very common for when you meet someone, the first question they'll ask is, what church do you go to? And I always think to myself, where did this come from? Who brought this subject up? Really, right out of the chute. You say, hi, my name is Joe. Yeah, my name is Pete. What church do you go to? And it just floors me. This happened recently. With my wife and I were in a restaurant. We saw another couple there, and we just chatted, over the tables to each other. And my wife went over, and she said, oh, we talked for a while. They were very nice people. And the woman asked my wife, she said, well, what church you go to? And it stumped my wife, but she was really quick on her feet. She said, well, actually, on Sunday, my husband and I go biking, and we observe nature. The expression on that woman's face changed 100% from friendly to, I don't want to know you. Now, right. Understanding that, when people ask me about religion, I tell them that I'm probably the most religious person they've ever met in their lives. And they say, well, how's that? I said, because I do what is right, at least in my definition, and I could be wrong at times, but I really try to do what is right. I don't harm other people. I help. I do whatever I can. I try to do the best for my family. I harm no one. I try to be productive. I don't try to waste time, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I said, my only problem is that although I'm probably the most religious person in the world, I have not been able to grasp the concept of God.
Right.
And I answered, and
Me neither.
I can't grasp it. I said I am the words I use. I say, but I have been incapable. So I'm blaming myself. I said I am incapable of grasping the concept of God. Oh, sure, I can to have an image and say, well, that's God and that's it. But that doesn't answer any questions for me. I'm still in the same spot. At least I admit it. And that conjures up more anger than anything else. And I have never been able to get around that. Could you help me solve this problem that I've had in Oklahoma here for the past 41 years?
Well, I can try, certainly. I think you live in the Bible Belt, so people love Christianity a lot more. I think that my approach to this whole thing is when people ask me about God, is I just say I'm very skeptical about it. And the one thing that sort of generates a positive response is I say, I hope you're right and I hope I'm wrong. I hope that there is a God. I would certainly love to live forever. I would certainly like to live in heaven. It sounds great. So I hope that you're right and I'm wrong. But in general, I just say I'm very skeptical about all of this. But I would also point out, Joe, that in general, the philosophers of the world have betrayed you, even going back to Aristotle. I think it was pretty well understood that there was no such thing as God, even back during the time of Plato and Aristotle. But at the same time, the people that did believe in God, and God, in case you're curious, it began with the Eleusinian mystery cults. It didn't begin in Jerusalem. It began in a city about 40 miles away from Athens. These Eastern mystery cults formed the foundation for later monotheism. But from the very beginning, these guys were just vicious, and they would kill you if you didn't believe. And if you think about it, it's logical, because they sort of argue that the key to getting into heaven is belief, and therefore if someone comes along and he's very honest and very rational, then that guy really is an objective threat. So he's going to take away your belief. He's going to give you truth you don't want to hear. He's going to try and, so to speak, confuse the issue with the facts. So it makes sense to, I guess, to kill the religious. To kill the non-religious or the atheistic. But I think philosophers have failed from the very beginning, and we only really started to get a decent amount of atheism maybe like 150 years ago with Nietzsche and Russell and Sartre. And if you ever read like a book, I've recently read at least one book on atheism, the history of atheism. And it's fascinating to see how much the people that believe in God, or the people that don't believe in God, are just relentlessly attacked. They're hated. They're considered to be lower than
That's correct.
Used car salesmen. So I can't really help you out completely, Joe. I would simply say you should maybe, a friend of mine is an atheist like me, and he calls himself over and over an agnostic. And it might be interesting to hear, for you to realize, which I did not know even like 6 months ago, but when the word agnostic was invented, when atheism was finally gaining power, like in the mid-1800s or the late 1800s in Britain, the first person, the leading atheists of the time rejected that term. They felt it was very cowardly and very dishonest, and probably it is. But I would say you can live your life better if you just identify yourself as an agnostic. That's what my friend does. That's what many people do. So just call yourself a skeptic and call yourself an agnostic, and tell these people that you hope they're right, that you hope there's a God, you hope that there is someone who will let us live forever.
Yeah. Well, the response that I typically receive is, well, you obviously haven't read the Bible. I said, yes, I have. And I said, that even confirm my convictions further. I don't say that, but in my mind, I say confirm my convictions even further. That anyway, but we're going to get into this religious thing. But and this is very dangerous in the state of Oklahoma. You don't talk religion unless you say God bless you, and that's about it. And there's not much thinking. There's not much rational thinking in this state. It seems it's either you believe this. And, we go to war to Islam because Islam is bad. We kill because if we don't kill them, they'll kill us. And we make it very plain. It's so plain and simple, black and white. I mean, why even think about it?
But I even would say that this is where I'm going to sound arrogant again, but I even think that the philosophers did a sort of bad job because they weren't aware of my concept of liberalism. In my book, I actually contrast reason, rationality, science, and logic with the two alternatives. I say that all failures of philosophy fall into two categories, which is right wing and left wing. And when it comes to religion, or when it comes to reason, the failure on the right is known as dogma and faith, and the failure on the left is known as relativism and subjectivism. And so if you ever find, if only like the philosophers, if like Aristotle and Epicurus and Zeno the Stoic had realized that, 2,300 years ago, I think that the people that chose to go against reason would have a much harder time. If you advocate for something which is supernatural or superstitious, you're really attacking the universe, you're attacking Mother Nature, you're attacking what I call Father Reality, you're attacking natural law, you're attacking the laws of the entire, metaphysical and physical and material universe. And so if people would take a more simplified approach to this and just realize how important reason and logic is, and how much, for example, reason, I make the case that the truth is objective and absolute. So if you realize that the truth is the same for everyone, and that 1 + 1 is 2, and elephants are larger than mice, believe it or not, if you stick with that, eventually you will end up realizing that either God is absolutely non-existent, or at least the evidence against him is really, really massive. I believe it or not, you might be surprised to hear this, but I don't consider myself to be a pure atheist, and maybe the leading atheist on the planet, which is Richard Dawkins, he doesn't consider himself to be a pure atheist either. In his book, he said he contrasted people who believed and disbelieved, and he said the believers are rated like 1 and the disbelievers are rated 7, and he rated himself as 6.9, and that's kind of my belief too. I think that death is a horror beyond belief. That's kind of what philosophy is concerned with. I think it's a moral abomination. I'm a transhumanist. I don't know if you know what that is, but that's a person who believes
No idea. I've never heard that before.
Well, transhumanism is going to be a massive philosophical and social movement in the next 20 or 40 years. It's going to be overwhelmingly big. It means it's an attempt to defeat death through medical and scientific methods. And that's good. I as usual, I'm sort of new to this, and I sometimes lose my train of thought, so let's leave it at that.
Okay. All right. Well, hopefully then I'll be broadcasting on this station forever. This is what you're saying.
Right. Well, I think that death is a horror, and so people invent God in order to live forever, in order to defeat death. And it's up to philosophy, including people like me, to sort of provide them with comfort in the real world, not in the fake world, and to make their life, even though it's short, meaningful and worthwhile. So I sympathize with the religious, but I think that their beliefs, I can't find anything that seems like it's true in the Jewish Bible, the Christian Bible, the Muslim Bible, the Mormon Bible, and everything. Every time I think about God, it seems to make absolutely no sense. So I hope there's a God. Now, I believe it or not, just to show you how radical I am, I actually have a kind of a belief, sort of, in space aliens. I can't think of why life should only exist on Earth. It seems like there should be other planets that have life. I think that some of them are bound to be evolved way beyond us, and I think they probably have immortality. I think that death is a kind of a disease which can be defeated, and I think it will be defeated maybe in 100 years or 200 years. It's not going to do me any good, but I think it will be defeated. So I actually sort of believe maybe that space aliens will come along, and if we're a very worthy person, maybe they will grant us immortality. And at least I have a teeny tiny belief that maybe I'm misunderstanding this whole issue, and perhaps God in some sense exists. Although if God does exist, I think he's probably horrified and repelled by all of the Bibles and all of the current religions which are popular.
Yeah. Recently I saw a documentary on television, and it was they excavated an ancient civilization in which they estimated the time of the people living there was close to 10,000 years ago. And they took a laser machine and had the laser machine trace the crevices between these massive, I think, 40-ton stones. And the laser machine determined that the variance from one end to the other was less than 1/10,000th of an inch. They said in today's technology, that would be virtually impossible, but yet 10,000 years ago, someone did that with a hammer and chisel. And so you you have to think that somebody came here at one point in time. This did not happen, and it's not just one rock, it just happened to split perfectly. But they're talking about many structures, several structures that have the same characteristics. Now, you have to take that as some sort of evidence that something was different then than it is today. And so I'm on the same page as you. I really don't know.
Well, maybe not. Maybe not. I don't think so. I really don't believe in any of that. I mean, I think that that's just people hoping for something which it's like religion. They're hoping for something which is not there. It's like believing in ESP or the paranormal, or the stuff they always talk about on what is it, Coast to Coast Radio, which is nonstop space aliens. I don't believe in any of that stuff. So unfortunately, I have zero evidence that space aliens exist. It's just that it seems like, there got to be other planets that have warm weather and water and the same chemicals that we have and the same physical laws. So, why can't they develop life there? But unfortunately, in many respects, I think that life is tough in the sense that we seem to be really, really alone in an unbelievably big universe. And so that's a challenge for philosophy, even if you're a good and rational philosopher. And that's a big opening for the religious, and it's also a big opening for people that, talk about the paranormal and Easter Island and the Bermuda Triangle, which is, I think that is all 100% non-scientific and irrational nonsense. I would love to believe in it, but I can't.
Well, critique me for a minute. People ask me why I don't believe, and the response that I give them is that I say, well, when I say I believe, I'm saying to myself, I really don't know. The response I get, they say, well, don't you believe that your wife loves you? I say, heck no, I don't believe my wife loves me. They said, what kind of marriage do you have? I said, because I know my wife loves me. If I just believed my wife loved me, I would probably leave her.
Okay, well, that's an interesting. You're talking about words again. That's very interesting. That's a charming story, actually, and but I would say you're talking about words, and words are very powerful. I think that one problem we have is that people sort of have faith in God, or else they have faith in reason, but that's not the correct word. What you should have is confidence in reason and trust in reason, and you should basically have faith in absolutely nothing. You should subject everything to critical scrutiny based upon science and logic, and the great Royal Society of Britain, which is their scientific society, says their motto is by no one's authority. So basically what that means is that you should seek the truth and use no one's authority. Just use your own mind and logic and try and be very thoughtful and insightful and tell the actual truth. Don't rely on other people.
All right. Could you tell us a little bit about, you mentioned in your book about the liberal 10 commandments. Can you briefly go through those for us, or cherry pick them if you would like?
No, I cannot, because I wrote the book with great care, but I can't memorize it. I'll show you what my book is. Maybe you can see it just a little bit.
Yeah, please.
It's this book. It costs $3 by ebook, and it's like $12 if you get the print. It takes about 1 week, and it's like $8 plus $4 in shipping. But I wrote that with immense care. I think I wrote 6 commandments which were personal morality, and 4 commandments which were social morality. Of course, I have the book here so I could read it, but I haven't memorized my own book. All I can say is that every essay in this book was written with great dedication, and I tried to hit the bullseye. So if you have a question about one particular one, I could explain it, but I did everything I could, everything in my human power to make a list of 10 commandments, which was very superior to the Christian one. And it's based upon, again, my belief in reason and individualism and freedom.
Yeah.
But especially based on reason and individualism, because freedom is when it comes to personal happiness, basically you should focus on reason and individualism, and you should recognize that it's very hard to affect the political system.
Well, that altruistic philosophy of helping thy fellow man, how would you address that?
Well, I think that your fellow man is wonderful. I think that there's a natural human solidarity. There's a natural brotherhood of man. I think that you should, in general, spend a huge amount of time telling the truth to your fellow man, especially your friends and relatives, and being loyal to them. But at the same time, you should sort of go forth in a noble, almost godlike way, and you seek your own happiness first. You do not put them above you, and you don't let them somehow self-sacrifice themselves to you. You each live for your own sake. You recognize that you're an independent, perhaps wonderful person, and you have a very brief existence, and you should try and make your life a kind of a jewel. And human beings are very social creatures. Aristotle made the claim that if we had a choice between living with all goods, as he put it, but no social company, we would choose to die. I think he's actually wrong about that. I would choose to live if I could find a few dogs to be friends with. But,
we have 3 right now, by the way.
Right. I would even find value in staying alive in a sort of cold, empty universe when I was the only living thing around. Maybe. I don't know. But human beings are very social creatures. It's just a shame that we have this sort of you are your brother's keeper ideal, which is taught by Barack Obama and everyone.
Right.
The right way, basically this business of self-sacrifice was sort of unknown, to Aristotle and Epicurus and Zeno the Stoic. But after a while, it became pretty popular during the Dark Age when the Christians were ruling. And then when the communists started to take over in I think it was 1863, more or less, you had this famous guy who was famous called Auguste Comte. And he invented the term altruism, which means, it comes from the Latin word altru, meaning other. So it means otherism. So basically, he doomed us all. He said that the right wing and the left wing now both believe in brother's keeper ideology, self-sacrifice for him, and altruism. And now, unfortunately, the word altruism has a very kind of good ring to it, and the word selfishness has a bad ring to it.
Right.
So basically, the right wing and the left wing, as always, are completely incorrect, and you need to embrace what I call the upwing. So my book is my attempt to change the way people think, but also change the way they speak. So I want people to reject the right-wing conservatives, the left-wing progressives. I want them to embrace the up-wing liberals like me. And I want to convert the entire planet.
Okay, I'm with you 100%. All right, I'm converted. I'm with you 100% on that.
Right.
At least you have at least one follower, okay? I'm sure you have thousands and thousands, but I'm one of them. But people translate what you're saying in strange manners. It wouldn't surprise me if someone translated what you were espousing, that if you were walking down the street and someone fell and was bleeding on the street, you would just step right over them. I mean, this is the quantum leap that people make, saying, "Well, you are so selfish. You would watch someone suffer because you would rather just go to the bar and have a beer."
Well, that misunderstands human nature. It somehow says that when people are self-interested, that's harmful to their fellow man. It means they don't care. Well, a truly selfish man will have a decent amount of compassion and generosity. Right. And if he sees someone that's hurt, he will realize that if he spends 1 or 2 minutes helping him out, he can do a tremendous amount of good. And later on, when he himself finds himself in a similar situation, someone else will do that and help him out. And so for a very small price, in his own personal happiness, you might say, he generates a huge amount of benefit for the other guy. And so this is part of a sort of unspoken contract among men. It's part of our it's sort of an unwritten agreement which we all have. And it's also very normal to feel sympathy. Even babies that are less than 1 year old are very sympathetic to the pain of the baby next to them. And so it's just a kind of a non-stop smear, especially led by the Christians, but also over the last 150 years by the socialists and the communists, in which they claim that somehow human nature is evil. No, human nature is good. It's their philosophy which is evil. Right-wing philosophy is morally wrong. Left-wing philosophy is morally wrong. They both agree. They fight with each other, but the Christians and the socialists, they go to war, sometimes literally. but they both agree, they both attack the individual, they both attack individual happiness, and politically they both attack individual freedom. So they say that we are somehow flawed creatures. When I was growing up, believe it or not, they used to say, I grew up in the Midwest, which is similar to you. They used to say openly that a given church believes in the total depravity of man. So that's like about as evil a statement as you can make.
Right.
So both, basically, the right wing and the left wing believe in the depravity of man. They say that we are, we're naturally at each other's throats. We're naturally cannibals. We're naturally murderers. And they say that it's in our self-interest to stomp upon our fellow man, but it never is. It's in our self-interest to have friends and lovers and have great allies.
Right. Well, Kyrel, we are about out of time. This has been one of the fastest hours, and you have been one of the best guests we've had.
Thank you.
In years. I truly enjoyed this. I was skeptical. I said, well, geez, he will talk about philosophy. I have no idea. I'm not a philosopher. But I thoroughly enjoyed this. I learned a lot. I'm sure our listeners did. And I certainly hope that you will accept an invitation to return at a later date.
Well, I'd love to, especially if I can find someone who is very intelligent and can attack me brutally, because I'm an arrogant guy.
We will find someone.
I want to face the toughest enemies and challenges I can
find.
All
right, we're gonna get a hardcore conservative and a hardcore liberal, and we're gonna get you on the air with you. Okay, how about that?
That sounds good.
All right, great. All right, we have about 30 seconds. If you'd like to do a little bit of a promotion of your book and where they can buy it, and whatever else you want to say.
I can just sort of repeat that it's a self-published book. This is The Coming Trend. It's available on Amazon. You can order it through Barnes & Noble, but you should probably just order it directly through Amazon. And you can read it in 5 minutes if you want to. And it comes in all sorts of ebook forms, every form which exists, a computer, a tablet, a phone, or whatever. But it's also great to have a print copy. So that's like $8 plus $4 in shipping. So I hope everyone checks it out. It's 99 essays, very brief. Each essay is about 1 page. It's very strong, powerful, and terrifying. But don't be you have to be sort of the moral or intellectual elite, or you have to know something about libertarianism or objectivism. It's not for everybody.
Okay. Thank you so much, and I hope we'll be talking to you again.
Okay. Thank you, Joe. It was my pleasure. Thank you.
Well, I guess this is, we're still on, aren't we? Are we still on? Yeah, we're still on. We're on. This is the end of today's program. We'd like to thank our sponsors for the financial support. We'd like to thank you for listening in. You can further the cause of liberty by recommending this program to your friends and let us hear from you. Our email address is comments@libertytalkradio.com. Remember, folks, you're either allowing your liberties to be taken away or you're striving to protect them. Unfortunately, there is no middle ground. Until next time, this is Joe Cristiano. You've been listening to Liberty Talk Radio. Stay well, stay tuned.